3-acre site with 7 structures. 6 are buildings and 1 is a beautiful gazebo we have across the street on what we call our south lot. So we are glad to have you here. I was told that this is a journey story, and we certainly have a journey story connected to the Starr family because they did not move to Marshall until 1870. They moved from Nacogdoches, but had moved to Nacogdoches from other places as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about their journey, and then I think we're going to look around the site and give you some interesting information about the Starr family and some of the artifacts we have here in Maplecroft and on the site. So Dr. James Harper Starr we consider to be the patriarch of the family. He grew up in Ohio, was born in Connecticut, but his family journeyed to Ohio. And as a young man, Dr. Starr attended medical school for 2 whopping years and paid back his medical school loan within 3 years of graduation. Don't know if that can happen today or not, but maybe, depending, I guess, what kind of doctoring you're going to do. He also was a land speculator early on, and everywhere he moved, he speculated in land. So it certainly set him up for success when he finally came to Texas and made his fortune in land speculation. I always tell people Dr. Starr gave up doctoring for land because you can put gold in the safe from your land sales, but you can't put chickens in the safe from your doctor payments. So it's always a ha-ha, but it's probably about half true, I would say, that Dr. Starr probably was paid in goods that would non-durable goods is what we might say. So Dr. Starr brought his sons into the business with him and actually did business with other family members, including son-in-laws, in-laws, and other family friends such as Charles Chevalier and Henry Regay. Those are some notable people, and if you don't know them, look them up, go down that rabbit hole, because we all know research is fun and entertaining and gets us away sometimes from the troubles of the world. And I think we have a few troubles here in 2020. So the journey story, Dr. Starr graduated from medical school and moved to Georgia, Henry County, Georgia. There he met his wife. He did not intend to get married, but she was a very sweet 16-year-old who was the daughter of a very prominent man in Pleasant Grove, Georgia, Henry County, and he married her. And prior to his move to Georgia, he and his brother, Franklin Jefferson Starr, had already kind of set their hearts on moving to Texas because they knew there was a lot of opportunity for them to get into the land speculation business, and of course that proved to be quite true. So his brother Franklin followed him to Georgia and settled in a town called McDonough, which is the county seat of Henry County, and married a young lady that he met there named Pamela Orne. While Dr. Starr established himself as a doctor and a land speculator in Henry County, his brother came to Texas on a kind of a reconnaissance mission in about 1833-34 and loved it. And so the brothers decided, yes, we're going to move to Texas. Well, the first brother to come to Texas was the brother, Franklin Jefferson Starr, and his new wife, Pamela Orne. They arrived in Texas on Christmas of 1835, and Franklin quickly took his oath of citizenship in San Felipe de Austin, which was the capital of Stephen F. Austin's colony down and around Independence, Texas. So, or not Independence, I'm very sorry, in San Felipe, which is about 45 miles west of Houston. Sometimes, even the state of Texas gets confused on geography, so sorry about that. But Dr. and Mrs. Starr followed after the Texas Revolution ended, and it was safe for them to come to Texas. And due to the trouble in San Felipe was burned to keep it out of the hands of the advancing Mexican army after they had gotten finished at the Alamo. So the families ended up settling in Nacogdoches. They kind of wanted it to be temporary, and they wanted to move down around Washington on the Brazos and Independence. That was kind of their goal, kind of in what they called the Brazos country. That never came to fruition. Dr. Starr's brother passed away in 1837 from heat stroke after being out with the posse to chase down some rogue Indians, and leaving a widow and a son, a very young son. So Dr. Starr quickly took responsibility for his sister-in-law and nephew, and the families just stayed in Nacogdoches. Unfortunately, about 2 years after the death of her husband, Pamela Starr's son died, and his name was James Franklin Starr. But he died, and that was kind of the death knell for her in Texas. She moved back to Massachusetts, where she was from, and ended her days living in the household of one sibling and then another. She wrote all sorts of letters to this family and stayed in touch. But by 1870, people were moving out of Nacogdoches. Nacogdoches in 1870 might have been considered a dying town at the time, and we do have letters in our collection where the Starrs are writing back and forth to friends talking about how all the prominent people have moved out of Nacogdoches. Now, I love Nacogdoches, so please don't take that as a negative. That's just what the Starrs thought in 1870. I go to Nacogdoches every chance I get, and I think you should too, because it's a fabulous place. But anyway, by 1870, the Starrs had a lot of land that they were dealing with, and at one point in their careers, they managed or owned over 1 million acres in Texas. So when you have that much land, mobility is really important. And even in 1870s in Texas, the roads were really just tracks, and when it rained, most of these tracks were impassable. And I don't know if you know this, but traveling by horse on a good road or a good track, a man can only go about 15 to 20 miles a day. If you're pulling a wagon, it's only about 10. So think about how long it would take you to get from Marshall to Longview. Couple of days. And we gripe because it takes us 30 minutes and we get caught at the light in Hallsville. But anyway, so the Starrs were looking for mobility so they could go visit the land they were purchasing and selling and go to various courthouses to file documents. So Marshall was getting a train line, and it was on their short list. The other two cities on their short list were Galveston and Tyler, but the family chose Marshall. Dr. Starr was familiar with Marshall because during the Civil War he had served for about 2 years as Postmaster General of the Trans-Mississippi Department, which was headquartered here in Marshall at Wyalusing Plantation. Now that's a whole nother talk that you guys need to see, but I'm not going to expound on it now. So Dr. Starr was familiar with Marshall and knew some people that lived here, so that may have kind of been what swayed the family to finally settle here in Marshall. So Dr. Starr bought this acre that I'm standing on with a house that faced north called Rosemont. It was a rather large house, 2 stories with a half wraparound porch. And he and his wife settled into it, and Frank and Clara Starr had been married by then and actually lived with his parents until they built the house behind me called Maplecroft, which was completed in 1871. So you all stay tuned, because 2021 is Maplecroft's 150th anniversary, and we're going to party like it's 2021, probably safely and socially distanced, but we're still going to have a great party to congratulate Maplecroft to turning 150 years. And when I turn 150 years old, I hope I look as great as she does. So that's kind of the journey story. There's a lot of other things to tell, but perhaps you'll come for a visit and let us tell it to you in person. We do have 6 text panels here on the grounds. You can get a great idea of the family history and a little bit of the history of Marshall from just reading those. And being on our grounds is completely free, and we love having you here. This is state property, so you own it as much as I do. I'm just paid to clean the toilets. So you all come on down and visit us, and I hope that you stay with me as we go through the house and look at the other buildings and hopefully you learn something you didn't know. So behind me you can see the sun shining on our 2-story water tower. The water basin was in the top half, and the equipment to pump water and the piping for the water basin was in the bottom half. The bottom half was also used as storage for landscaping equipment, hose, rakes, shovels, things like that. Now over to my left on the east side of the property we look what it looks like. There's a well which is on beside the schoolhouse. It is actually not a well, it is a cistern, and down ground level and below, the bricks are still there in a circular pattern, and that was to collect water. Above the cistern was a windmill, and in the same photograph we have of the schoolhouse that shows the fireplace, also shows the windmill. One of these days, budget allowing, we'll have the windmill back. The windmill would pump the water from the cistern up into the basin in the water tower, and we assume but have no proof that the water from the basin was gravity fed. Probably to the kitchen at the very least, but it could have been to the rest of the house as well. As early as 1884, Frank Starr was having plumbing installed into his house, and he installed 2 sinks, one upstairs, one downstairs, and a bathtub for his mother-in-law. In 1889, water pipes by the city were run down to J.F. Starr's house. We have a newspaper article that says that the pipes were run all the way down to J.F. Starr's house. I'm thinking there might have been a little bit of this maybe involved, but maybe the city was just feeling philanthropic and running it to the very edge of the city, which is where we were located, by the way. So in 1889, Frank Starr had a flush toilet installed into his house, which was pretty progressive and pretty early for flush toilets, because I have an aunt and uncle that lived out in the country about 10 miles from me, where I grew up in Allen, Texas, and they didn't get a flush toilet until 1972, so who knows. So anyway, that is the history of kind of the waterworks here in town. I could tell you a whole lot more, but maybe you should do your own research. So thank you for listening. We have arrived in the parlor. This is a formal parlor that really would have only been for use by adults, not children. And why is that important? Why do I say that? Well, because in this house, the home of Frank and Clara Starr, which was completed in 1871, Frank and Clara, through their marriage, had 10 children. My glasses are fogged. And those children all grew up in the house with the exception of 4. So of the 10 children, 8 were girls and 2 were boys. Unfortunately, Frank and Clara, like many families in their time period, lost 4 of their children. We do not know what the children died of, but they did all die before the age of 2. So that left Frank and Clara with 6 girls, because they lost 2 of their daughters and 2 of their sons. So the girls, so if you hear me say the girls, that's who I'm talking about, because those are the ones that grew into adulthood. Of those 6 girls, 4 had children, and their children had children, and so on. And we have quite a few Starr descendants spread from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and very often they do come by to visit, and it's always a delight to have family members. Sometimes we try to tell them little tidbits about their family history that they don't know, such as Harriet Johnson Starr, Dr. James Harper Starr's wife, is a distant cousin of LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Her father and LBJ's great-grandfather were brothers. So that's always a little tidbit that sometimes is received with a smile and sometimes received with a grimace. But, you know, we're no judge. We don't judge here. So anyway, we're here in the parlor, and like I said, the children would not have been allowed in here unless it was a special day, like their birthday or the minister was coming to visit. And as we go through the house and you see all these wonderful artifacts, you might be surprised to know that about 90% of the content of the house is original. The house, not the flooring and not the drapes, but about everything else is original until we get to the kitchen. And in the kitchen, nothing is original because we just restored it to be a working kitchen. And as if you know anything about museums, you can't really use artifacts when you can't really handle artifacts. So we bought items we call use items, and we use those in the kitchen for our cooking demonstrations and our cooking workshops. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the heart of the house, which, as we all know, is the kitchen, because that's where we get the best, and on a bad day, the worst smells in the house. I think you all know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you just burn stuff. It's just an accident or carelessness, and I can tell you that on this stove right here, I have burned plenty of things because this kitchen is a full 1880s working kitchen, and there's nothing in here that we don't use in order to cook meals and do food waste programs 1880 style. So I want to tell you a little bit about this wonderful stove. It has a name. It's called the Grand Quaker. It was made by the Taunton Iron Works in Taunton, Massachusetts. We purchased this stove from a place called the Antique Stove Hospital in Rhode Island. They had found this stove out in some guy's field and restored it, and we purchased it from them. When we bought it, and this is about 3 years ago, we had not had any idea to make this a working kitchen. It was going to be a show kitchen, one you could just come in and look at and walk out, kind of like the rest of the house. But we decided, hey, this is everything's going to be restored in there. Everything in the kitchen we have to buy, from antique stores or order that are reproductions. Why not make it a working kitchen? So that's what we did. So this little stove had to travel back to Rhode Island to be outfitted to be a working stove and then shipped back to us. You would think that shipping a cast iron stove all the way from Texas to Rhode Island and back again is expensive, but it's not as expensive as you think it is. It was about $400, which is kind of surprising considering the entire thing's cast iron and pretty heavy. It did leave on an 18-wheeler truck, and it did arrive back on an 18-wheeler truck, and we did have to find some pallets and quite a bit of packing, but we got it sent there safely and we got it back safely, and we get to use this wonderful stove, which also does have an oven, and I timed it the other day. I did cook last Tuesday, and it took me 1 hour to get the oven up to 300 degrees. And that was burning a lot of wood. So we don't cook very often because it takes a lot of wood to keep this stove hot, but the wood we do have is from a tree that fell on our south lot a couple of years ago. It was a big pecan tree, so all the wood we're currently burning is pecan, and pecan emits a pretty nice smoky smell, so I don't really have a problem when I go home smelling all smoky, and neither does my husband, so it's a win-win situation there. I hope you'll come visit us. I hope you'll check out our Facebook page because we do have a couple of food waste videos posted, and we do have plans to post some more, and we have some great plans for Christmas. We're going to talk about figgy pudding. What is that? Well, tune in, you'll find out. We're going to talk about some of the history of some of the traditions around Christmas and just try to make it fun family entertainment.